Please, don't erase the blackboard. Today we meet the woman who changed her brain. Barbara Arrowsmith-Young lived the first 25 years of her life in a dense fog. She was labeled by teachers as slow, difficult, accident-prone, and worse. In spite of the traffic jams in her head, she made it to graduate school and started a school to help people who have brain disorders and severe learning disabilities. Imagine not being able to tell time, recognize your own baby, read a book, say words that make sense, or find your way to work and back. If you have a son, a daughter, a parent, a spouse, or a brain, the empowered Arrowsmith-Young knows how to help you change your brain. She changed hers. It is my pleasure to be with you today and with Canada's Barbara Arrowsmith-Young. She grew up with multiple learning disabilities and multiple labels, everything from gifted to extremely dumb and difficult. She now works slow miracles with thousands of individuals who have neurological deficits. She is the founder of Arrowsmith Schools, where it is proven daily we can shape our brains, which begs the question, does the brain shape us or do we shape our brain?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, we know that this incredible organ that we carry around with us everywhere we go filters our perceptions. So it filters our perceptions of ourselves, of other people, of the world, and of our relationship to the world. So it definitely shapes us. But I think what is so exciting and what I've learned through my work is this whole concept of neuroplasticity, that the brain is capable of change and that we now have a lot of knowledge as to how we can go about changing the brain so that we can shape our brains. If we have a limitation or a deficit or something that isn't working, we can stimulate or exercise that part of the brain to change it, to build strength where there wasn't strength, and to allow the learning to go forward. And to me, that's incredibly exciting.
You are also living proof that can happen. Welcome to Vancouver, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take me back to a 6-year-old Barbara Arrowsmith-Young, or a 5-year-old, or a 4-year-old. What was your world like?
Well, before starting school, my mother knew that there was something not working well with me. She was convinced I would be dead by the age of 5. I was so uncoordinated. Really, the whole left side of my body was like an alien being. I didn't know where it was in space, so I would run into things. I spent a lot of time in emergency rooms getting stitches. I just couldn't judge where my body was, and I didn't register where sensation was coming from. So if I put my left hand on a hot burner, I would know that there was pain, but I had no idea where the pain was coming from. Once I slammed a car door on my head and fractured a tooth with my left hand, which sounds pretty bizarre, but if you don't know where this part of your body is in space, it's like it's unrelated to you, and it would just do things that I really was a danger to myself.
Yes,
and
complete
so,
klutz.
A complete klutz, exactly. So that was the sort of first indication that something wasn't working well. And then once I got into school, that's where the real struggles began. I struggled to learn how to read, to learn how to write. Numbers meant nothing to me. And in grade 1, there wasn't even a term learning disabilities. This was in 1957. So my teacher told my mother that I had a mental block. And being a child and literal, I actually thought I had a piece of wood in my head that made learning difficult. And basically in grade 1, I was condemned to a life of struggle. The belief at that time was the brain is fixed, nothing can be done about this. And I was told, learn to live with my limitations. And it was very challenging. So I learned a lot of the strategies that children do. I would spend 20 minutes in the washroom to avoid, the lessons that were difficult. I got the strap in grade 1 because my teacher thought I was doing all of, I wasn't learning and it was deliberate. And maybe if, she gave me the strap, I would change my ways, but I couldn't help how I was learning because that's how my brain was wired.
Was there anyone else in your class who was in your same position that you could relate to, who was writing letters backwards, or was it kind of the silent problem?
I was the only one that was obvious. I mean, all of the other students, I could watch what they were doing, and they seemed to be learning with ease. I mean, they were picking up the books, learning how to read, and I wasn't. So I was the outlier or the misfit in my class.
And school was terrifying.
School was terrifying, and I couldn't excel at sports. I mean, I wasn't good academically, and because of that kinesthetic problem, and another problem I had, a spatial problem, if a ball was coming at me, I would want to run in the opposite direction. So nobody wanted me on their sports team, and no wonder why they didn't, because I was not an asset.
When did this start to change? What changed?
It wasn't until I got really all the way through school and into graduate school. I had a phenomenal memory, both an auditory memory and a visual memory, so I could memorize almost like a photograph all of my books, and if I listened to something, I could play it back like a tape recorder. So that's
you
how
listened to the radio,
and then
to the newscast.
The newscast, and then if I heard it, like say I heard it at 6 o'clock and then I heard it again at 11, I could repeat it verbatim. So that's how I got through. I memorized everything. I didn't understand what I was memorizing, and then when I went to write an exam, I would hope that I had some glimmer of understanding of the question and that I would make a good match. I would pull up that material in my data bank and match it to the question. But sometimes I did a terrible match and I got 10%. Sometimes the match was good and I got 80%. But I never had a sense. Like most people walking out of an exam know I did well, I didn't do well.
You had
I had no idea until I got the mark back. And of course the teachers would feel that if I could get 80% once, when I got that 10%, it must be that I wasn't trying hard enough.
Sure, or you didn't study.
I didn't study, and I was trying equally hard for the 10% or the 80%.
In a specific subject, math for instance, could you add 2 plus 2, do times tables?
Not very well. I mean, I would use my fingers to count. I did a lot of memory work, so I did memorize the times tables, but as soon as it got into understanding, like fractions, like I could write 1 with the line underneath it and over 4, but I had no concept what 1/4 meant, that it was 1 part out of 4. There were no relationships in my brain.
So obviously your algebra, your A plus B, A minus B, and factoring was not your thing. What about problem solving?
Problem solving, again, in mathematics was a challenge. Like anything, because mathematics is all about logic and relationships, and there was no logic in my world. And even in relationships with people, there was no logic. I mean, I was vulnerable to con artists, because how does one, figure out a con artist? You hear the logical inconsistencies. Well, I couldn't discern those. Jokes. Jokes you hear, like you figure out the irony. It's all kind of irony or relationships that are funny. So I would learn to laugh when other people did, and I would gauge the amount of laughter by how funny the joke must be, but I didn't understand the jokes.
So a dense fog.
That's exactly what I described. I lived in a dense fog, and I used to have this image that I was on the outside of a plate glass window, and there was a banquet happening on the other side. All these people engaged, interacting, having a good time, and my face was pressed to that window. And there was a barrier. I could not participate because I couldn't understand what was going on.